I'm Matt Carpenter.
And I'm Peg Keough.
Welcome to the College Podcast. We are going to be your ultimate guides in helping you figure out how to navigate this maze in such a way that you don't lose your minds or your wallets. Let's get started. Okay, here we are back for another week. If you'll have us, Matt Carpenter. I forget, do we say our names, Peggy? I think we'll say them.
Matt Carpenter, Peg Keough.
Yeah, here we are. Welcome to college.
Here to talk college and all things college. But, one thing I just want to talk about before we get on here, is March Madness is just around the corner.
And your
Best
favorite
time of the
holiday
year for college basketball. So maybe some of our listeners are into it too. I have some friends that hightail into Vegas for the first weekend of March Madness. Not me, but.
Yeah, love that. And your favorite holiday, Peggy? Less than a week out, right?
Or I know, and my hubby's birthday.
And your hubby's birthday.
It's a double whammy. Plus, he's almost 100% Irish, and I'm a lot Irish, so.
Big day for the Keough
It's
household.
A little calmer day for me than it used to be in my foregone years, but it's still a fun day.
I hear you, buddy. And it's on a Monday, so we can only do so many JMOs.
Yes.
On a Monday here. Yeah, it's 311 today. You know that group at all? You ever listen to them? Yeah, they were.
It's a band.
After your time, Peggy. I used to be big into them in high school, and I still have a soft spot for them. So I don't think they're your speed. That's for a different podcast, but I could find a couple tunes you'd like, and you know. Okay. Well, let's actually. If you guys are enjoying this, please follow us. Right, follow the podcast. That's how kind of we get. If you listen, I mean, we love it. We appreciate you, but please actually hit that follow on Spotify or wherever you listen. That's how we know that it's not just, our moms listening, which they are.
I don't even think my mom has even tuned in yet, to be honest.
Come on.
I need to share it with her. I guess that might be part of the problem.
There you go.
Need to walk her through it. But yeah, please follow us. That would be lovely. And share with anybody you think will, get some value out of it. Help them with what they're dealing with, what they're going through. So.
Even better. Okay, so look, let's here's the punch list real quick, right? As promised, I think for the foreseeable future, likely, I don't know, through this calendar year, we're going to be talking about these constant changes in our space in this ecosystem, Department of Education, specifically as it pertains to higher education. So we'll start there. What's the latest and greatest and kind of what's the fallout? And then, as always, what can we do about it, right? Even the things that we cannot control. We still have some agency that will continue to be a theme for us. We'll talk about some of these hiring freezes, especially at some of these more pretty prestigious universities, of which you would think they would have no problem with budgets, etc. So we'll kind of double click on that. And then lastly, this news is, obviously our focus is generally around the financial piece of higher education, right? That's kind of skill set and our first language, but we pay attention to everything is happening in this space, admissions and socially and the whole deal. So we'd be remiss at least not to talk about the announcement of the Trump administration, specifically from Linda McMahon, the new Secretary of Education, canceling $400 million worth of federal loans to Columbia, right? And it sounds like maybe that's the first domino. So we'll talk through that and our thoughts and observations there as well. But Peggy, why don't you just kind of talk us through, what's going on now with this kind of impending or whatever proposed closing of the Department of Education?
Yeah, it's still just kind of, I don't know what the word is, lingering, or that threat is just kind of up there. As we've talked about, they can't completely get rid of it. That needs to be an act of Congress, but they can and they are firing people and giving people the option to retire and get $25,000, all that kind of stuff. So different departments are seriously depleted as far as the workforce, which could affect all of you if you're needing to call up the FAFSA helpline, for example, that kind of stuff. So that can all affect you. But the big thing as students in college or upcoming students or parents with kids in those two buckets is like, how is this going to affect everything? How is this going to affect the loans and everything? Like the Department of Ed oversees different areas, right? They oversee the FAFSA, which, provides federal financial aid. And then something else you might not know, but if you stick with us, you're going to understand this really well, is that most colleges in this country, except for about 250, that's all they use to give out their aid. We call it institutional aid. And that's the biggest bucket to get money and to get discounts off the cost of college. So that really matters to all of you, this institutional aid. Good news is I have not read, and chime in here, Matt, if you have anything about dismantling the FAFSA, nothing like that. But what they're saying is the pieces of the department that have their mandates, we're going to move elsewhere. And they might move it. The part that matters to all of you, they're talking about the Treasury or the Small Business, SBA, or the Commerce Department. Kind of doesn't matter where they move it as long as they have their act together. But they're talking about moving those things, not just, completely saying everything's gone. But there are different pieces to this, and we've talked about this before. Like there's a Pell Grant, which is for low-income families. It's an entitlement like Social Security, so it can't just be abolished and go away. Congress can lower the amount of the Pell Grant, but they have to fund it. So if you're reading stuff about shortfalls, it's valid, but don't think, oh my gosh, my family's Pell eligible, we're not going to get it. Down the road, if they lower the amount, that could happen, but they're going to have to figure out how to give out the Pell, because it's an entitlement. They're going to have to borrow from here or there to make it happen. That's... Yeah,
well, I'll tell you, some of the writing that I'm seeing on the wall here and just where I see this going is, obviously we don't know, right? Just like you're saying, it's a lot of unknowns out here. Maybe the Pell gets reduced. Maybe it stays where it is. We already know that some of these federal, which I want you to talk about again, but some of these federal loan programs are being paused, are being stopped. So that is to say less flexibility, right? Less attractive repayment plans, right? And again, the general theme here, and it's been said explicitly, I'm not reading between the lines too much here, is like, we're not giving as much money. When I say we, the federal government, we're not giving as much money to this, or at a minimum, we are taking a really hard, close look to make sure that every single dollar is accounted for, right? And with some really ambitious goals. So we know state schools, right, public universities, the vast majority of the money that they give, the discounts that they give, come from the federal government. Or comes from the federal government, right? Less institutionally, to your point. State aid is just not that impactful in most states, right?
It does come off the FAFSA as well, right? But yeah, you're right. It doesn't hit as many families.
What I'm seeing is just going to be, I'm like, okay, I'm just seeing more evidence that the types of colleges that are going to be more affordable, especially for families that don't have a lot of means, right? That have, a lower income and not a lot of resources, are going to be these schools that are really generous with need-based financial aid, right? The technical term for that is schools that meet 100% of need or close to it. So which is really confusing, right? It's counterintuitive. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to let my kid apply to, Tufts or Colby or Bowdoin because they're $100,000 or approaching it. Well, guess what? For most families that are middle class and below, those are going to be your most affordable options, right? Now, the challenge is, like we always say, you got to get into these schools. Like, just like those examples, they're really competitive. But again, I'm just seeing more evidence, and maybe it's a shift peg. Maybe it's just one of these, how many things go in cycles where all of a sudden when college costs got out of control, we saw this kind of mass exodus towards state schools, them just getting more and more popular, and just like, wow, these state schools that everybody got into 10 years ago now are, incredibly hard to get into. And a part of that was just cost driven, right? So maybe there's this kind of migration back, because as we know, state schools for a lot of these families, they might even be more expensive than they are.
Yeah. And state schools, they're just not like where I am out in Seattle, UW, University of Washington. You could be potentially over 30 per year, so it's not cheap. It's not like, parents used to say, well, I worked through college. You to pay for college, like that's just not a thing anymore. Even state and community college, potentially, right? But not 4-year in-state and privates. It's a different ball game as far as the pricing. But yeah, so what you were talking about before, so the loan forgiveness and what we call IDR, income-driven repayment, which there's a SAVE plan that's part of that. We don't need to go into detail of what that is. Everybody that I'm reading and people that are in the know and are deep into policy have said, the SAVE plan is most likely, I've heard say, dead. Most likely dead. Trump administration has made it clear they're not into all this loan forgiveness. Republicans in general, you saw when Biden tried to put that stuff through, there were a lot of lawsuits from the Republicans in different states. Things were put on hold. So if you're going into this, don't count on loan forgiveness. Don't count on any sort of income-driven repayment. And that means exactly kind of what it hints to. when you get out, based on what you're making, that's what your payments are. In the save plan, you could have potentially had payments of 0. Don't count on that. If it ends up being around, that's icing on the cake. But when you're doing your planning, that Matt and I both strongly recommend you do, don't say, well, that's always been around, that's most likely to stay around. That's not a good assumption to make. Then there's the government has something called subsidized direct student loans that any family with need and the student completes their FAFSA automatically eligible. And the colleges love to give these out because it lowers the bottom line of what the family has to pay. And it's a great loan because the government pays for the interest until 6 months after graduation. I always tell families, this is a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you take this? You know you got to repay it. But the day after graduation, you could just hand them a check for the principal and you just had to float on that money. That, I haven't read anywhere that that's going away, but that could go away. But it's not something you have to stress about now. They're not going to just say tomorrow, nobody can have them. There will, and I'm saying this is what I believe, but there will be, okay, as of this date, these are no longer going to be funded. It's not going to be a tomorrow thing. So if you have a senior in high school right now and you're planning, colleges we're in the same boat that we've always been in. We're going to see these on award letters. It's going to, in my opinion, it's going to take a lot to make that change, and it's not going to change that quickly, but it could change. So if you're doing your 4-year plan, which again, we both recommend you do, it's just a little, we don't know. It's a little bit of an atmosphere where that could be there, that maybe won't be, and same thing with Parent Plus loans, which we've talked about on here. If you're a grad student, grad loans, that all falls under the purview of the federal government. We just don't know exactly where that's going. And then, sorry, I'll just say this one more sentence that I will not want to hog the mic here. But, the administration and Linda McMahon have made it clear we want to get out of the loan business. We want to move it to the states. Like they've said that, meta level philosophy a lot of times.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, and again, if we distill it down to a couple things, it's like, all right, number one, it's going to be less attractive. There's going to be less options to borrow through the federal government. And that's by design. That's what they're trying to do here. And they're just, in some cases, creating more options. I mean, a frustrating anecdote, and I'm sure that, I know that millions of people can relate to this, was, a student that we worked with over the years had a great undergraduate career, getting ready to go off to medical school. He had set up his income-driven repayment plan that was going to be really manageable while he was in med school, earning, little to no money, and his payments were $95, signed off on that agreement contract, right, between him and the federal government. And all of a sudden, he couldn't get back in there. It said his IDR was being canceled. And then he can't get anybody on the phone. Department of Education, Mohella or Nelnet, whoever was managing his loan, just cannot talk to anyone live, not for lack of effort here, right? And frustration. And then just gets a notification that, hey, your repayment plan has been changed and you owe $350 a month, like starting Friday or whatever. And that was last week. So just a complete rug pulled out from underneath them. Can't get anybody on the phone. And so that is, I don't know, I have a lot of compassion for him and all these families that are going through some version of that currently, right? It stinks. It's just not fair, especially when you have an agreement. Like, fine, get rid of the plan, okay, for whatever reasons that, and I don't disagree with all of them, right? I understand some of them, but to rip up the contract that you had with borrowers, I think is just ridiculous. And those folks.
I've never read one of those contracts, so I'm not a lawyer, but I like to act like I'm one, To me, like, you're in a contract. That's the whole point of contracts. You can't, I can see going forward, but, I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits. It's stressful. It's stressful. They take time and people will want to address this because, like you said, that's profoundly unfair and doesn't even seem legal when you're in a contract with an individual. I don't care if you're the federal government. You need to honor that contract, in my mind. But again,
helpless feeling,
not
right?
an
And
attorney.
hopefully, just a helpless feeling. I mean, I wish we could do more for him. We're going to try to be a megaphone and, see what we can do. I might even have him on here in the coming weeks just to, hear directly from some of these folks that are going through some of these challenges. But some other things that you can do, you should be doing right now to help yourself for those that have to borrow, which is most folks sending their kids to college. start getting really intentional with your credit score, right? And not just you, the student. A lot of these lenders, specifically in the private sector, which is going to dominate the space this year and at least for the the next 4 years here, it's going to be tied to the quality of the loan that you get, rate, flexibility, repayment terms, et cetera, is going to be largely tied to the credit score of the cosigner. You're going to have to cosign on the loans as parents, with your students. It's not like when maybe you went to school where you could borrow the whole amount yourself. It's not like that anymore. So you're going to have to cosign on here. And then some of these lenders, more than not, are also going to look at the student's credit score if they have them, right? So not all of them will have one. So you want to investigate that as well. So those are some things that we can start doing now, regardless of where we are in the process to.
Well, and a super easy way for a student to develop a credit score. When they take out loans, they'll start doing that. And I did this with my 2 kids. Just go to a bank and it was like a high school, I forget what they called it, but it was like for high school kids. They had a $500 or $300 spending limit. It was in their name. It was their credit card. So they started building a credit history, but even to me, even more important, they started learning. I spent $75 or I spent $100 fee. And, the whole thing in our house was make sure you can pay off what you spent. If you can't, save and then use your credit card to buy it. Credit cards are fine. It's just reasonable. So that's an easy way to start doing it. And they can start learning how to spend money appropriately when they're still in the house. Instead of, you're younger than I am, Matt, but like when we went to college, they would give out credit cards to these kids, and kids were like, awesome, I'm buying a stereo. We used to buy stereos with speakers that were like 6 feet tall. I am really dating myself now, right? We got one for a wedding gift with all the components and everything. But kids will go buy that stuff, and then they're like, oh, I can't even pay the bill. I can't even pay the minimum. So it's a good thing to learn that. And then when they're in your house still, you can guide them when they maybe screw up, because we all do, right? That's how you learn. So that's a great way for them to start building credit.
Yeah, and just something practical that we can do today, right? We're just like, all right, well, what do we do about this? There's something you can do today, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're seeing more about these hiring freezes, and a lot, or I don't know about a lot, but a decent amount of these colleges have already kind of put that into place where they're, just kind of this general freeze. We're not hiring. Any kind of comments, observations?
Yeah, I would say, always it's like, why would I care about this? Why would our listeners care? What does this mean? The reason that it matters, and what we've seen is hiring freezes. Okay, well, if they're letting in a lot more kids and they're not hiring more profs, that's going to affect your kids' experience, that kind of thing. There's that. But then and then they're talking about PhD students. Again, not unless you're a PhD student listening to this, that doesn't really matter. But when they're cutting, it trickles down. And so I've been telling people, and this has been true for a while, but now even more, because people get nervous, like, well, what if this school starts cutting or they're having major financial problems? Like, if your child knows what they want to major in, look at these schools and how popular that department and those majors are. Because Matt and I have seen through the years what colleges will do to cost cut is like, yeah, we barely have any kids in this major. Let's just eliminate it. That saves us a chunk of money, and we're not losing a lot of that net revenue from families, because that isn't really a popular major. So I'm not saying if you look at a school and it's not a huge major that it's going away. It's just something to think about. And that's how these funding cuts, they can trickle down and affect everything. I was just talking to a mom yesterday who I was astounded. It was Cal Poly, and Cal Poly has shared with them, like, they admit 9% of kids. Next year, they're going to admit 16%. So that brings a lot of revenue, but I bet they're not hiring tons of faculty along with that. And her child's having issues getting the classes they need and he needs, and is probably going to transfer because of it. So all these things, like I said, it trickles down. So it's just something to keep an eye on. If, right now it's more of these highly selective colleges that we're seeing do it, which is a little bit funny. They're sitting on billions and billions in endowments.
Yeah.
That's where we're seeing it, and that's what's being reported. But I think other schools, maybe it's not hitting the mass media, are doing it too. Like, obviously Cal Poly is messing around, and that's a California state school. So they They get funding from the federal government, at least right now. And it's a very popular school too. It's hard to get in, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to start. I mean, that's a massive shift in the percent of kids they're going to accept. And it's got to be a monetary reason they're doing that, because being so selective makes you seem like you're better, which you're not. You're just more selective in stats, right? So they don't want to give that up if they don't have to. Schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure there's a spectrum here, right? But I think especially for these schools that have unlimited money, right? Like some of the ones that are on this list, I've got an interesting, I don't know, a little bit of an insight. My wife works at one of these world-class institutions in Cambridge, right? And so, I think for those types of schools where, again, they have unlimited resources, essentially, I think this is more of just like hitting the pause button. Let's see what's actually going to happen here. Okay. It's also a nice little virtue signaling of like, hey, we're complying. We get it. You guys are pulling money back. We're going to, trying to get in some good graces here. And you tell us what these new initiatives are that we have to follow, right? It's a little bit of walking on eggshells, but I doubt that there's going to be too much that, actually happens at those types of schools that's too material. I just think it's like, all right, we'll hit a pause button until we just know more. Like a lot, like almost that's happening with a lot of the federal government. I'm just like, we're hitting pause. We're just, and stay tuned for more details. Nobody's being fired, right? Nobody's being let go. Again, at these types of institutions just yet. It's just all right, how's this going to play out? And then we'll see what happens. And I wouldn't be surprised if that just kind of gets lifted and it's much ado about nothing. Obviously, we'll see. And that's not the case with every institution, right? I think some schools are really, we talked about Washington State and Rutgers that were like actually scrap plan. I think it was at Rutgers, right? They scrapped plans to build this research facility that was.
Oh yeah, because they lost the NIH funding, which is a whole different thing that was lost. So it's an atmosphere of uncertainty for all these colleges. So they're trying to figure out how they respond to that and, be responsible on their end for, just staying afloat, and to your point, every school's going to be different. And this might be a little bit like, hey, see, Trump administration, we're cutting costs. We're playing ball here. We get it. So whatever, we'll see. It's to say it's an atmosphere of uncertainty is kind of an understatement for these institutions. So it's hard for them too, all of them. So,
Peggy, let's see how we can navigate this one. So this is something that we've seen has been teased, I guess, in since Trump took office, and trying to address anti-Semitism that's happening on different college campuses specifically throughout the country. And the first kind of, I guess, very tangible thing that we saw happen this week was, $400 million in federal money is going to be withheld from Columbia because of this, right? Because of the task force findings, I guess, of illegal protests. And again, just kind of this anti-Semitic climate that they didn't think Columbia did a good enough job to stop or subdue or whatever. What's your take here, Peggy?
Yeah. And when I was doing my reading, like it even said, they called it hotbeds of anti-Semitism. So I think if you all remember, this all came on October 6th when Hamas took all the hostages, came into Israel, that horrific day, right? And then things started coming off of that. So I think there's a definite, we do have free speech in this country. We do have the right for lawful, peaceful protest. I personally feel like on some of these campuses, these kids were pro-Hamas. So Hamas is a terrorist organization, obviously. That's different than just saying, hey, the Palestinians have rights too, because they absolutely do. Israelis have rights, Palestinians have rights. What Hamas did, I don't know if anybody could argue was okay. You went into a sovereign country, you took hostages, you're a terrorist. And then Israel retaliated. We don't need to get into how we both feel about every little thing that's happened since that day and, October 6th. But I think there is a difference there between pro-Palestinian sit-ins or whatever that are peaceful and people running around saying, yay, Hamas. And it's escaping me the word that they used a while back, and it has a very real meaning that's not something that really should be thrown out.
I don't know if you're talking about from the river to the sea, which means wipe out
Maybe
Israel.
it was that. It was, yeah, maybe it was the phrase. And like it has a connotation that's known, and that's like, oh, we didn't mean that. So that's where, to me, it's crossing the line. And the universities, like you remember, it was Harvard and was it Columbia and another one of the other biggies. They
MIT,
talked to Congress.
UPenn.
Yeah.
I mean,
UPenn. That was the other one. And they spoke to Congress. So one of the many things when Congress does this and says, come to us and talk to the committee. And they weren't really saying, well, yeah, they're not saying what I'm saying. They were very like, well, we can't do anything. And that caused a lot of problems. And so that's my take on it. It's hard because there is free speech. It is America, but there's certain things that are, not free speech. Like you can't go online and say, kill every white person. There's certain things that aren't free speech. And I think these college kids cross the line in some of those cases, and the university didn't step up in some of these situations. And I think that's what caused a lot of this. So I don't totally disagree with the Trump administration. I'm not going to say I agree that Columbia should be targeted. Something happened last week at Barnard, which is, part of Columbia. I'd have to do some way deeper reading to say, hey, was that legit before I would comment on, do I agree with them with this school? But I do agree that, college campuses are supposed to be like this place where you're exposed to everything, you're learning, you're figuring out who you're going to be when you grow up, literally. And so you should be exposed to a lot of ideas, but certain ideas are not, they're ideas, but you know what I'm saying, Matt. They're not ideas that it's okay to stand, should we have like Hitler come and talk? You know what I mean? Like it gets to a point where that's too much, and now you've crossed the line. And the universities en masse didn't do that. I think they act like scaredy cats a lot. In my opinion.
I mean, look at so a couple things here. First, I think you navigated that as a difficult subject about as well as you can, and like just sounds like common sense, which we could use more of across the board, right? You would think it would be kind of that simple, what you just laid out. I mean, I'll preface this with I am emotionally and kind of biased here, right? Where I have some first-hand or maybe second-hand experiences here, right? So my wife's Israeli, English is her second language. They speak Hebrew at home. I mentioned earlier she's at one of these institutions. She works at one of these institutions, and it was really disappointing because we always said before October 7th that, is one of the most diverse places on planet Earth, like per square capita or whatever. Like you hear so many languages, so many different countries represented, all people like coming together in mostly this great way, right? And these part of the reason why they're these world-class institutions, because they represent the whole world, right? And the best and brightest from every country. So, when you talk about DEI, these are like the leading examples of what it means to be, this diverse community working together. But then we laugh when this happens. I'm laughing. I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but whatever, make light of it. Be like, unless you're Jewish, right? Because, it got to be one of these things where she couldn't wear Star of David and things like that and people are physically blocking entrances to places. Like it was kind of freaking wild.
That's where it's crossed the line. In this country should feel unsafe. And it's happened, right. Chinese Americans or Chinese people, when COVID hit, it's like, oh, we hate them. Right. They're the reason for COVID. It's like none of this has a place in America and who we are. And the Jewish community got hit with this when all of this happened. I mean, and stuff happened to Palestinians. Some people were murdered after that. I mean, it's just none of this has any place. And I know this sounds really hippie, and I probably would have been at Woodstock if I was not like 7, but we all just need to learn how to get along. It's not that hard to be nice to the next person next to you and show them some dignity and respect. It's just not that hard, but it seems to be a big hill to climb for whatever
and you know
reason.
What? I'll tell you, Peggy, it's like I even admitted this when these encampments were happening and all this. I'm like, Rosie, if I'm being honest with myself, if I was 18 or whatever, I'd be like, wait, what are we protesting? I would have kind of thought it was hey, I'm carrying the torch for my parents and make love, not war, right? And they were, my parents were active protesters during Vietnam, right? They and I remember always hearing about that. And I'm like, would I really done the research to find out what is happening here and what, I doubt it. I probably would have just been out there like, oh, let's smoke some weed and set up a tent and, give me one of
Friends are
those.
there. This is great.
Yeah, exactly. Give me one of those signs. This is better than class, right?
Yeah.
However, can't understand that with the professors, with the adults in the room. The kids, the college kids, I pat them on the head and I say, you guys don't understand what you're talking about. Go back to a keg party. Okay, the professors have less faculty. Well, give me a break. You're adults. And again, there's a difference to your point. There's a difference between saying we're concerned with what's happening with these Palestinian people and we're supporting freaking terrorists that are torturing and killing people like this.
Yeah,
there's no nuance there. There's no nuance there. So,
and you should be able to make a statement about any group of people, Irish Americans or the Israelis' policy of how they're handling it, all without just immediately being labeled as a racist. You're anti-Semitic or you're this. Like there's ways to do it. And when you bring up professors, like some of these cases with professors, I mean, they can't look cross-eyed. And all of a sudden they're out on the street, right? And nobody will touch them with a 10-foot pole at any other university. I mean, this has been happening. That's a whole nother podcast about great book I read a while ago about the coddling of the American mind, That's the title. So I'll just throw it out there. It's one of the best books I've ever read. But that's a whole thing. That was happening before all of this happened. So college campuses, they just have a different feel than they used to. I think there's a lot of fear that faculty, there's just so many examples of professors saying or doing things that are totally fine, but somebody doesn't like it. And usually some 18 or 19-year-old kid, to your point, who's like basically a kid, they don't feel safe or whatever it is. And some of those claims are valid, but some of them, it's like, hey, you need to sit down, take a deep breath, and you probably need to grow up, And this professor should not be fired because you don't like some word that was used that's a word in the English language, Yeah. So it's gone to the extreme, but this whole deal with what happened on October 6th just took it to a different level. So back to the whole thing with Columbia, if you want to hit them, if the behavior and the way the university is handling things is not right. If we make that assumption, neither one of us are saying we 100% say that, cutting their funding is a way to get them to function in
there's got to be some accountability, right? There's got to be some accountability. And again, that I forget his name, but whoever they're talking about, maybe deporting. And again, to your point, I don't know this, right? I'm not an expert. I wasn't leading the investigation. But if he was rallying people to support terrorists and you're here in our country on a visa going to one of our world-class institutions, there's no place for you here. That's it. Like, if you're here to support and rally people around terrorism, there's no place for you here, right? And so I don't, and again, it kind of, Colombia was, by all accounts, one of the hotbeds, one of the origins of it. So yeah, there's going to be some consequences for what you didn't handle correctly, because I know a lot of these institutions did a great job. Vanderbilt, Washington University in St. Louis, I'm thinking about University of Michigan, right? That completely turned the tide, right? In terms of like, where so many students that, Jewish students specifically, that were feeling like completely unsafe, being correct, they got it right? And so anyways, there's
a few other schools that are kind of on the hit list potentially. There's GW, George Washington, Johns Hopkins, and a University of Minnesota, which was a weird one in the middle of NYU and Western Johns Hopkins. But Omar, a major Democrat, just that happens to be in her area. So coincidence? I don't know. Because there's they seem like a real outlier. Just the type of school they are. They're a great school. I mean, I know a lot of kids that go there. They give great merit aid to out-of-state kids, just to plug for Minnesota. But that was kind of interesting. Like, is there any political motivation here that, who knows? I'd have to do some deeper research to claim that. But but this is going on right now. This is the latest. And I'm sure some of these, if they start coming out, they could be legally, somebody could file lawsuits and challenge it. Yeah. We're seeing this over and over again from stuff that comes out. So we'll just have
more
to
wait. Come. And I wouldn't be surprised if, there's another handful of schools that they do this to. And maybe because at least Columbia's response was like, look, we're going to do whatever we need to do to hopefully unlock that funding. So maybe they give them a chance to say, hey, clean up X, Y, and Z, and you get your money back, right? And Obviously, so long as they comply, maybe it doesn't end up happening. Who knows? But yeah, probably we're going to hear a couple other institutions, or maybe it's just a few. And because to me, I was like, all right, they're making an example out of these guys, and that's going to get institutions to pay attention.
Oh yeah, yeah,
$400
big time.
million getting withheld from most places that are not named Columbia University is a death sentence, right?
Yeah. So, well, and they're gonna, and it matters to Columbia too, even though it's Columbia. So that matters. That's money. That's real money. So.
Okay, well, hopefully, I don't know. Maybe we offended some people. Maybe we didn't. I think we had an adult conversation around a hard topic. So, anyways. Oh, and by the way, Peggy, and if that offended anyone, I don't know. That's probably a you thing. But I forget what podcast he was on, but he's like the director of security or the director of campus safety at MIT, right? And the conversation was kind of around this tone, and like the podcaster was saying, like, it feels like these students are, obviously he's generalizing, but like are just so sensitive. And you got to walk eggshells around them, and to your point, a thing of fear. And he's like, yeah, he's like, that's absolutely true in his experience. And he's like, and the thing is it's everybody's saying, I hear all the time, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. Somebody just said this. Somebody just said that. And he said, it's not my job to make people feel safe. It's my job to make them actually safe. Like, that's my job as a campus safety, is to make sure that people are like physically safe. If you're in some lecture or go to see somebody speak and somebody says something that, makes you feel unsafe, I don't know what I can do with that. Right. So I appreciated it coming from him. So.
Yeah, that's another podcast to discuss that, because that's a very interesting dynamic, raising two kids and how I did it. And just kind of, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting, though.
And again, that's not everybody. We're generalizing, and I think it has more. I think in certain campuses, you just see more of it than other campuses, right? And again, even at those places, it's not everybody and all that. But let's just kind of end with like we used to, right? Obviously, we talked a little bit more on the what's happening on the social front in some of these campuses. But as all these changes continue to happen, and they will continue to happen, they won't all be bad, right? Again, going back to that term I loved hearing a couple of weeks ago, what could go right? There are some things that are going to go right here. It's not all going to be Armageddon, but it's even more, right? My hope, my real silver lining on this is it's going to force more people to pay attention and just not say, oh, I'll figure it out, and we'll just go to state colleges, and I'll just borrow through the federal government, and I'll just do, no, let's actually figure out what these colleges are going to actually cost me. Let's actually figure out, is it private schools or state schools that are going to be most affordable, for my kid, right? Let's actually figure out what we can come up with before we have to start borrowing. And then before we even tour campus, if we're class 2026 or below, you can know exactly what that school is going to cost you over the course of 4 years versus your budget and how much you're going to have to borrow, all the way down to what monthly payments you're going to have before you go to tour a campus. And you should. Right? There's no excuse. We have all this stuff at our fingertips.
You don't need to make one spreadsheet. We've done it all for you.
That's right.
Yeah. It's always been important, but now even more so because of what we talked about at the beginning. We don't know if there's going to be loan forgiveness. We don't know if there's going to be subsidized loans in 3 years. So just the more you plan, and I know a lot of people, it's hard to think about. You got so much on your plate, but you really need to do it, because otherwise you could be setting yourself up to work until you're 70 or 75. Like, it just can really, really affect your lives as parents. And so we can't, we're saying this from the bottom of our hearts because you really need to do this, not because we want you to use our process and our software. We do, because it's the best out there, but just do it. Do something. I have Boeing engineers through the years as clients. They show up with giant spreadsheets. I love them. They usually forget some stuff, I pointed out, but they're doing something. Like, you got it. You just can't bury your head in the sand. And like, if you have a high school kid, start doing it. Senior year, it's better than not doing it, but it's late. You've made, to Matt's point, he said it, I'll do it before you start looking at colleges. Because you could be looking at Maseratis, literally, and you have no idea. And when you go on the tour, the colleges are going to say stuff that's true, but they might not share everything. They won't share everything. And so you'll hear it and go, oh, well, if I could get that much off the cost, we could make that work. But your family's never going to get that potentially. So they're saying it to a large group and they're not including, yeah, but if this and this and this, you don't fall in that bucket. They're not going to do that. They're marketing their product to you. And so
Yep.
you've got to be in the know. It's like when you go and buy a car, you got to do a little research about what's the cost of that car, for what's their, what's their cost and how much do they want to make it? Am I going to borrow? And what? You got to do a little research or you're going to get taken to the cleaners by the dealership. They're great at doing that, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, and look at these colleges are very sophisticated marketing machines. I mean, they're unbelievable. They have huge budgets and they're wildly talented at it. So you're going up against, again, some very sophisticated institutions. And the kind of last thing that I'll leave you with, if you're at the finish line, so if you're class 2025, you're in college, right? What can we be doing right now? Number one, don't take the first deal. We're always appealing to go get a better deal, getting more merit scholarships, getting more need-based financial aid than that first offer. We're not saying yes to the first offer. We're going to build our credit now, even though it's late now with our student and with us. And then we're going to get really smart if we have to borrow when it comes time to shop for a loan. So more to come.
and
We'll be
even
talking
if
about-
you're in college, you can
Right.
still appeal. You can still
Absolutely.
reach out. Is it, it's a different ball game. And we're not saying that you'll be, it depends on your family situation, but you can always ask. And there is money in departments when you're an upperclassman that an incoming freshman would never get. So there's different ways to go about this. You're not just set in stone after freshman year, whatever happens, in your package freshman year. So just keep that in mind as well.
All right, Peggy, I bid you adieu.
Right.
Yeah, this time next week, maybe we'll be licking our wounds. Day after Bill's birthday and St. Patty's Day, but I doubt it.
Yeah,
All right, my dear.
we'll try and show up for you all and be at our
do our
100%, even though it's post St. Patty's Day. So everybody have a great St. Patrick's Day if
And
you
follow us.
celebrate.
Follow college. Bye, guys.
Oh yeah, don't forget to follow us too. See you next time.
Bye.